to Science Headliners. Please welcome our host from Linda Hall Library, Vice President for Public Programs, Eric Ward.
Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick is an internationally recognized forensic genealogist and a pioneer in the development of forensic genetic genealogy for solving violent crime and unknown persons cold cases. She is founder and president of Indentifinders International and a co-founder and former co-executive director of the DNA Doe Project, where she led the team that solved the first two cold cases using genetic genealogy autosomal SNP testing. Dr. Fitzpatrick, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
For those who may not be familiar with the field of forensic genetic genealogy, could you tell us a little bit about what's involved with that research?
Sure. The genealogy community has been using DNA since 2000, for over 20 years. And along the way, different methods have been developed, different tools, and it's become quite successful for helping adoptees find their birth parents. So it became so good. It was over 50-50 chance that if you took a direct-to-consumer, DNA test that was suitable for genealogy, you'd be able to crack your adoption and find your family. So what we do is we apply all those techniques, all those skills to John Doe cases and to identifying violent offenders, because it doesn't matter really if the DNA, whether the DNA you are trying to identify belongs to an adoptee or a violent offender or a John Doe. You don't know who they really are, and they all would come down to using the same techniques to find out.
Give us a sense of how involved is a typical case. You upload a DNA profile to a database, and you put together a family tree or multiple family trees, correct?
Yeah, it's like this. It can be quite simple. Every case is like another child. It has its own personality.
Sure.
So basically what we do is, you upload your DNA. Of course, there's some prior work to get the DNA in the right shape, right? And get the right data. You upload it to the genealogy databases. We do not use Ancestry. We do not use 23andMe. We use GEDmatch and we use Family Tree DNA, and that's all within the guidelines, all within the right scope of doing things, all legal. And when we do this, we have a list of DNA cousins or matches, people that are related to our unknown person. And the more DNA they share with that person, the closer they're related, the less, the more distant. So we have a list of matches, and they may be second cousin, first cousin, third cousin, twice removed. We don't know. But we don't know who they are, but they're all related to Mr. X. So what we do is, first step, find out who all those people are. Let's say take the top 20, for example. So you find out who they are, you find out where they live, and you find out how old they are. And usually you can do this through their email address, or they have a very unusual name or something like that. And so once you have those, you start building their trees. And after a while, you're going to notice that they are related to each other. If they're all related to Mr. X, they have to be related to each other in some way. So as you build the trees, you're going to see the trees connect and connect and connect through their own common ancestors. And when the trees connect, if in a perfect case, you're going to see two groups forming, two trees forming. One tree, everybody's related within that tree. The other tree, everybody's related in that tree. But the two groups are not related, and that represents the families of the mother and the father of who you're looking for. So once you have those two groups developed, you find one person in one group that married somebody in the other group, and there's a parents, and one of their children is the person you're trying to identify, because that child, that person, is related to both groups in all the matches that have gone into forming those two groups. So it's like taking a whole bunch of data and funneling it down to exactly what you need.
Sounds like, science with a lot of old-fashioned detective work. to solve some of these
Yeah, it
cases.
can be because you have to identify, who you're looking for,
Sure.
the matches. You have to, do look through Facebook, look through public records. There may be an obituary somewhere online. You may have to actually old-fashioned call a library. You may have to do that. And in general, you can find out who somebody is. You're not going to find, any private information, but you're going to find out, say, what their name is, how old they are, and where they live. I mean, what's wrong with knowing that? We're not stalkers. We're not, scamming credit cards or anything. We just
Sure.
need to know where they live and who they are.
You have a PhD in physics from Duke University, and you had a long career working with NASA and the Department of Defense with laser and optics. What led from that career to a career in forensic genetic genealogy?
Well, that's a good question. I get asked a lot. I had actually my own company until about 2005, and we contracted with NASA and Department of Defense, so on, National Science Foundation. And, in that era, it was George Bush was president, and he was more of a big company guy, big business guy. So a lot of the smaller companies got chewed up, including us. So we finally had to close, but as my therapy, for the years going into that, I was writing a book called Forensic Genealogy. And it was how I was doing genealogy for all my life, and it had that scientific background,
Mhm.
but it wasn't complicated things. It was just tricks that I had picked up. So it turned out that, that when we closed the company, the book was about ready. We wound up publishing it ourselves, thinking we'll just do this for a little while and then we'll go on to something else and do another rocket science company. But it didn't work that way because the book was a smash. I mean, we sold books all over the place. I mean, we couldn't believe it. So in fact, we had opened our own publishing company to do this rather than find. I actually had a contract with a publishing company and they canceled it because it took me so long to write the book. They thought forensics is passe. We don't want it. But so we opened a publishing company. I mean, we're rocket scientists. We can figure this out, right? And so the book took off, and then the rest is history. Basically, I started getting forensic cases after that. We had a website. Somebody, saw a website, and it was an international investment company that specialized in unclaimed property. So they started giving me cases, and I didn't know, this was all 2005. The internet's relatively new. I got lucky. They gave me, like, in 2 years I worked for them, gave me 75 cases in 30 countries, and I got them. I nailed them. And
Wow.
so I taught myself Italian to learn to be able to call Italy and say things like, "Hey, is Giuseppe Verdi at home?" And, the answer I'd have to understand the answer, like yes, no, tomorrow, call later. I couldn't really, have a long conversation like we're having, but enough just to get my question in and get the answer back. And so I did that. And in the meantime, I got contacted by the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory about the hand in the snow case, pitched in on that. It turned out that the key was they needed somebody who did research in Ireland. Me. And that was lucky. And then I did the Titanic baby, so on, Amelia Earhart. It just kind of, the ball started rolling. And then, the cold case started kicking in 2011. I did military work, and I've done a lot of Holocaust research, reuniting Holocaust survivors and also debunking Holocaust frauds.
So your work goes well beyond criminal cases and other type of
It
cold cases.
does.
Yeah.
But the key, I want to say the thread here between lasers, nuclear physics, and forensics here is data, is because my whole life has centered around looking at data and making sense out of it.
I was going to ask how do you think your science background has helped you in your new career?
Absolutely. Because if you're presented with a lot of data, say, you're at the grocery store, you have all these products you want to buy, you have all the prices, you have all the per ounce, you have a lot of data in front of you. you filter it to what you want. You know, that's an easy example. The census workers, think of all the information in the census. But if you want to know how many people named Smith live in this town, you filter the data to get what you want. And that's our challenge here is we have all those matches have family trees and they connect. Let's say in a perfect case, they only connect once. So if I have 50 people, 100 people in my tree, where's the connection to the other guy with 100 people in his tree? You know, it's data. It's filtering and getting to the sweet spot and rejecting all the 95% that doesn't help you.
Let me ask you a question about your international work. Are is access to DNA available in most other countries? You know, we have these databases, these DNA databases.
Oh, well, this is a distinctly American phenomenon because U.S., you know, we don't really know where we come from, most of us. I don't. I know I come from Ireland. I have some information. So, you know, there's a longing to know where, you know, genealogy is a big deal here. More so, say, in Ireland, where people have lived on the same plot of land for 1,000 years. Really, it happens. So it's American phenomena. It's spread to Canada. It has spread somewhat to the UK. It's spreading. But, you know, in France, it's illegal. I think in Germany, it's illegal, this kind of stuff. I know Norway is considering it, but they're not putting their foot forward. You know, it's spreading as people become more familiar and comfortable. But part of the problem is you're taking criminal stuff and putting it in a commercial database. You're putting not so much commercial, but let's say public database. That doesn't mean you can log in and see everything. I mean, there are restrictions, but it's not a criminal database. It's not a government database.
You are founder and president of Indentifinders International. What is the mission of that organization?
Well, briefly, we find people, you know, it's to mainly we do the forensic genetic genealogy right now. But I have, like I said, it's more than that because you just don't sit there to do the family trees. You have to retrieve information from other places. So you have to be a good conventional researcher to do this as well. So we specialize, but as I said, I do a lot of Holocaust work. It's mostly human identification is what we specialize in many different ways. And I will say one of the Holocaust cases I worked on required research in 20 countries, tracking people down, interviewing them. I've researched in 52 countries, but that doesn't mean I've done DNA in 52 countries, nor does it mean I've visited 52 countries. You know, I've developed a network. At one point, I had a network, you know, all over the world of students. I'd pay them a little bit and I'd say, can you do this? And if you come back with the answer, I'll pay you a little bit more. You know, you can do that. I'm a citizen of the world. It doesn't bother me to do stuff like that.
You said 52 countries. You've researched in 52 countries. Yeah. Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's easier. I won't say it's easy, but it's logical. You know, if you ask me, I'll tell you what to do. It's logical. It's not, I can't call them. You know, they'll never understand me. No, you call and you say, do you speak English? And somebody is going to be there that speaks English.
Oh, sure. Yeah. You also was co-founder. You also are co-founder and a former executive director of the DNA Doe Project. What is that? What's the mission of that organization? And
DNA Doe is DNA Doe was founded. We founded it to identify unidentified human remains. We actually did the first 2 cases and were successful before the Golden State Killer. But we confined our mission to just those because at that point there was a big sensitivity of the community to using this for violent crimes, using the data for violent crimes. Now, prior to that, in 2011, I had used a more primitive version of this called, you know, using just the Y chromosome, which is the male chromosome, which is related to the family name. I had been using that since 2011, and I had already either solved cases using it. The first case solved was in 2015 using genetic genealogy. That was me. You know, I solved, if I didn't solve it, I did get the name, but it wasn't in the case file, and the guy was identified through conventional means, but it proved that it worked. So leading up to that, I had had a lot of criticism. I had been slammed on the social media. I had been really, ostracized because, oh my God, you're using my data to help solve crimes. Well, it's public data. Don't put it on the internet. Don't think you can put an electronic fence around your website and the police can't get in. And it's all for
Right.
the common good, for public, safety. So going into that, knowing, that let's say the attitude was not really keen on the use of data we felt that it would be more regarded as a humanitarian effort and, to identify John and Jane Does. And that's kind of why we took that position, and it seems to have worked out.
Sure.
And
What
I'd
is
like to
this?
say I'm not affiliated with DNA Doe right now. I left a couple of years ago, and I'm now 100% Indentifinders, and we do both violent crimes and unidentified human remains.
And what's the website? Identifinders.com, correct?
Yes, yes.
Identifinders.com. All right. And what's the future of forensic genetic genealogy? There's you kind of touched on some ethical considerations that some people have with it. Where do you see the future going with the field?
Well, I see a lot of collaboration. There is no right answer in a lot of cases. So what you do is you create policy. You say, if this comes up, we're all going to decide to do this. Because it's not, you can't say we won't use public data, and you can't say we're going to use whatever public data we want. You have to come to some kind of a compromise, because this is a game changer in human identification, the first real advance in 30 years since CODIS was developed. So you can't let it go, because it's actually improving our life. It's getting these guys off the street. Think of how many victims are not going to be victims because the guys are gone. So I think we would all agree it's a great benefit, and yet there's reservations, about public use of public information. So, it's going to be, law enforcement is absolutely respecting that, and the community is probably not as uneasy as it used to be, but there's still some concerns, and I see it evolving to more of a collaboration and a compromise in developing policy, what we can do, what we won't do, what we will do. The first few cases were easy, Caucasian European, okay, it worked. But now that maybe 400, 500, 600 cases or more are under our belt, we're starting to see those details come out, what we really need to think about and what we need to do and discuss. So in the future, I see it's going to work pretty good. It's going to work good. It's developing in parallel to how CODIS developed, and I can only see that it's going to be it's a real game changing tool for us to keep crime off the streets, and so we have to be respectful of the public at the same time.
Well, it's fascinating work, and I've always been amazed at your work and the media attention that you've gotten. So I look forward to reading more about the cases that you solve.
Thank you. Me too.
All right, I want to end with my 3 for the road, just 3 quick questions. Give me the first thing that comes to mind. Question number 1, you were on Wheel of Fortune at one time, correct?
Yes, I was on Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy. I was kind of
Oh,
bored, right? So
okay.
to tell the truth, I won on To Tell the Truth.
All right. I was going to ask you about a Wheel of Fortune question. Do you remember, did you solve one of those puzzles? Do you remember
I don't think
the
the
word or
problem was
phrase?
I was the third one. So by the
Ah,
time that it got to me, they were solved. But I did get some really nice parting gifts. No, one of them was Lincoln Tunnel of Love. Lincoln Tunnel of Love. It was
right.
before and after puzzle. So I remember that one. And it was funny. You have that video. Okay, whatever. But about 10 years later, I was, working on a case, and I had put it on my blog. And a lady wrote to me. She said, "Were you the lady on Wheel of Fortune?" 10 years later. I
Wow.
said, "Yeah." She said, "I saw an interview with you where you used the phrase smattering of other languages." And I was the other woman. I was one of the other women on the program with you. 10 years later, she comes out just because she remembers smattering of languages I mean, weird. You
Wow.
got to be careful what you say. It's never going
That's
away.
That's true. Everything's public, right? Like,
Yeah,
well,
Lincoln Tunnel of Love.
let me ask you about languages. You talked about learning a little Italian. How many languages can you speak?
Well, easily French, German, Spanish, and English. I speak some Chinese. I speak some Russian. I understand Swedish. I speak a little Italian now. I understand Swedish, Danish, those kind of Germanic Dutch I can get away with, understanding. The thing is, though, the main languages are what I would commonly use. I just was in Canada. I was speaking French. It all comes back. But when Chinese, I have Chinese friends, but I don't use it every day. The Russian, I probably won't use it every day, but if you put me in that environment, I pick it up enough to communicate.
Oh, interesting. All right, finally, question number 3. Do you have a particular solved case that's most meaningful to you or memorable?
I have to, every case is like another child.
Sure.
And my answer is going to be off-roading here. It's the Holocaust cases. Those
Okay.
are the ones that really I have to keep close to my heart. Those are people that survived against the odds, children that changed hands 3 and 4 and 5 times. And there are, they had given up hope of ever finding their family. And then through DNA, we connect them with their long lost relatives. So I just came back from Montreal filming a documentary on one of those cases where a guy, he was in, survived Minsk. It was a best-selling book called The Mascot. He survived Minsk. He was picked up around Minsk by some soldiers. He wound up in a chocolate factory in Riga, Latvia, for safety. The chocolate family took him in and brought him to Australia later, as a teenager. So he lived his life, and eventually, a long story, he wound up taking a DNA test, and it matched cousins in Canada, first cousins. And one of the guys in Canada actually was born in the same village as my friend. And they found old family pictures that looked just like him. That's the case. That is the reunion of somebody from Minsk in 1942, grew up in Australia, reuniting people in Canada, his cousins in Canada, by somebody who lives in California. That's the case.
Yeah, that's got to be rewarding when you see that moment happen.
When we all were in the same room, and it was fabulous. You never would, the Australians, the Canadians, and me, and we had never met together. And it was something you could feel, the connection just rush out at you, and people kind of hugging you mentally, for reuniting them with people they didn't even know were still alive.
Yeah, that's got to be incredibly rewarding. So
After 70 years.
Yeah. So again, Dr. Fitzpatrick, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing a little bit about your work and your research, and a little bit about your game show history.
Nobody asked that yet. People ask me, how did you get from nuclear to forensics and blah, blah, blah. But nobody asked me about that whole game show thing.
I found an article you wrote, and I forget where, but you talked about, you mentioned briefly about being on some game shows. So let me ask her about that. So
you did your homework.
Yeah, well, I try. So thank you again, and good luck with in your future research.
Yeah, thanks. I've really enjoyed it, so thank you for, interviewing me, letting me be on your show. And so just thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Science Headliners has been made possible by the generous donations you make to the Linda Hall Library.